Bello. Banano. Plátano. Banana. Why am I speaking Minionese? What is up, everybody? Random Random Man here, bringing you my review for Minions and Monsters in one take. Now, the plot of this animated comedy film follows the Minions as they set out to make a monster movie of their own in old Hollywood. Going into this movie, I wasn't looking forward to seeing it at first. Upon announcement, we have gotten word that there is a third Minions movie coming, and well, going through my history with the Minions or Despicable Me franchise, I wouldn't say that I'm anti-Minion. The first two Despicable Me movies, the first one from 2010 and the second one from 2013, I really enjoyed. And the 2015 Minions movie, I liked fine enough. I mean, I reviewed that over a decade ago, so I probably was warmer to it than I would be expressing now. And Despicable Me 3 from 2017, I liked fine enough as well too, from what I can remember. But I have not seen any of these movies since 2017. I did not see Minions Rise of Gru or Despicable Me 4. So I guess it's more so that I lost interest, or I have not really been too much in favor of the Minions or Despicable Me as of late. I don't know. I guess I just watched other stuff, and, seeing the Minions everywhere, they have become a huge mascot for Illumination Entertainment or animation. And this is something that was interesting, though, in that the concept for Minions and Monsters has them making a movie and just also following a different group of minions that are not the same ones from the Despicable Me series. So I was going in optimistic, especially because a lot of people were touting this as the best film since the first Despicable Me movie. But without further ado, starting out with the cast and their performances, we have Pierre Coffin voicing the Minions themselves. He's also the director of this movie, and he has basically been the lead creative of the rest of the franchise. He's directed other movies in this franchise too, prior to this one, and he's the voice of all the Minions, speaking Minionese, as I tried to do in the intro of this video. It's a mix of English, Spanish, French, and a bunch of other different languages, but that's also what is making the Minions universal in many senses, which I'll get to with the whole appeal of this movie. And the three Minion characters that are mainly focused on are James, Henry, and Ed. And these are the ones that are going around and sticking together. There's also a fourth Minion named Dick, which, oh my god, I gotta laugh out of that just out of immaturity, but he's also like the de facto leader of this group of Minions in particular, as again, they're separate from the rest of them. And the Minions are iconic at this point, whether you like them or not, because of like how they are, and all the slapstick, and just how Coffin just inflects a bunch of stuff in between to where he makes the Minions basically all sound the same, but I guess like when you're watching visually with all the different characters, yeah, they're distinguishable from one another. There's a lot of other people in this voice cast too, including Trey Parker, who plays this little Cthulhu-looking creature that is summoned by the Minions when they are trying to make their monster movie, and Trey Parker is one of the co-creators and lead voices on South Park, so I heard a little bit of Stan or Cartman in him once this character comes into the picture, so that was neat. Jesse Eisenberg voices this character in a robot suit, seemingly, named Dort, who leads one of the subplots that has one of the groups of Minions, or half of them, go off with him at some point in the second half of the movie. Zoe Deutsch plays a suffragette who eventually gets involved with Dort and that half of the Minions, and this also emphasizes that this movie takes place in the 1920s, with her wanting to have the right to vote for women be a thing as well, which of course history does prevail, and they eventually did get the right to vote. I love Zoe Deutsch. Jesse Eisenberg, I didn't even recognize voicing this character, so that's great. And some other characters I didn't recognize initially until I was further listening or watching. Jeff Bridges plays two brothers who are the heads of this movie studio that the Minions eventually end up at, and the director who discovers the Minions, Max, is voiced by Christoph Waltz. So this is quite an eclectic group of players in this ensemble for a Minions movie, no less, aside from Pierre Coffin, of course, voicing all these characters. And I think they all did really well and were actually really acting. They were actually vocally acting in this film. And getting into the writing of this film, so the movie begins at a film museum in modern day. Allison Janney, who's another person I forgot to mention, she voices a museum tour guide who also narrates the movie and basically goes through and focuses on this specific group of minions who are trying to find their big bad leader, just like the other minions in the other movies were trying to look for a big leader before they ended up landing on Gru, voiced by Steve Carell. And here, they eventually end up in 1920s old Hollywood, and they eventually see that they are involved with the making of a movie, and at first it seems like disaster, but then they are enlisted by Max to direct or be a part of making more movies. Then the movie transitions to where the sound era comes in. If you know your film history, like I do, in the late 1920s, going into the early 1930s, movies have started to incorporate sound after the silent era. Movies were always meant to have sound, but this creates problems because the minions don't entirely know English, and that's when they have to go ahead and leave Hollywood. And eventually, there's an idea made by one of the main minions, James, to create a monster movie so that they can get back in the good graces of just being this famous group of little yellow characters. And with this film, I think that the movie really has a surprisingly sincere tribute to cinema, aside from, the whole appeal of the minions being characters. Now, for the first, I want to say 15 to 20 minutes of this movie, you are going to have to put up with the minions doing their whole thing of hurting each other, going from master to master, all this other stuff, like they've done, at least from what I recall of the first Minions movie. So there's that. But I think with going into the appeal of the Minions, they do remind me a lot of the Looney Tunes in that they were a direct inspiration for the Minions. Of course, they about 100 years ago became the famous cartoons of the era, and now you could argue the Minions are too, along with a bunch of other different franchises. And in tributing old Hollywood and cinema in particular, the movie doesn't just do this as an afterthought. It really incorporates a lot of visual cues and references that made me light up because I love watching a lot of old movies too. It's not just modern movies that I like to talk about here. So there's references and visual nods to silent film stars of the era like Buster Keaton and Howard Lloyd. And then with the actual movies that the Minions are making themselves, there's references galore to a bunch of old films. There's stuff right down to classics like Casablanca. There's even a reference to Citizen Kane, considered to be the greatest American film of all time, or greatest film of all time, depending on who you're asking. There's a lot in here, and with the Minions being incorporated into a bunch of this, early on, the Minions themselves are actually incorporated into old footage of old silent films, like A Trip to the Moon, which I thought it was cute seeing them incorporated because it goes into a lot of the influence in history of cinema. But anyway, with all this together, and if you're someone like me looking for a bunch of oohs and ahs to reference at, you'll get that. But with the story here being so basic and eventually converging or diverting off to two different side plots once the Minions get ousted out of Hollywood, it makes for a film that I think keeps the energy and pace up to where we see the filmmaking group of Minions trying to conjure up a monster to be in their movie, and then the other Minions led by Dick going off with Dort and his whole thing. So I think that's what keeps it up, and the Minions themselves obviously are the main focus here, but the titular monsters, they don't come in until that second half, as I mentioned, once we split off into two different plots that eventually converge back together. So I guess you could say that's one thing that held the movie down for me, at least because the movie's already moving so fast and it's trying to cram in a bunch of all of this together. But I think that because of how the movie is just moving all around, I think it more than makes up for it, including with the animation here. I mean, it's been over a decade and a half since the first Despicable Me film, and the stylings of the Minions themselves and the whole kind of art direction that has gone in here hasn't really changed that much, just of course with naturally technology and quality of animation and rendering getting better. And The movie was made for apparently only an $85 million budget, which I'm impressed with how chaotic and colorful a lot of this movie is. It's very much a use of the resources and seeing how all this is coming together creatively that had me so engaged, surprisingly. And there's the original score by John Powell that has a lot of tinges and references and tributes to old Hollywood music and film altogether. And again, how it moves, I think the movie was always entertaining. And for a good chunk of it, of course, you're not understanding the minions completely, even though there are visual cues here. Like there's a bunch of gibberish on top of their minionese. And what's cool is that they have little integrations in between to where we know what's going on. Of course, a bunch of the other characters speak English anyway. Like Ed, the minion Ed, he's deaf and he communicates with sign language with the rest of the minions. So I thought that was cool to see incorporated. And on top of everything else, like I mentioned, with the film references galore here, I think that's what makes this movie stand out, especially with the rest of the series that I've seen up until this point, because there is a story here, albeit simple. And of course, the movie does go off and does the whole shtick that the minions have done and just speaking nonsense, hitting each other, a bunch of destruction everywhere. But I think with this movie, it has real purpose, and we're seeing it all come together to be something that, by its end, it surprised me all the way through, but by its end, I thought, wow, this movie really won me over, because it's like, okay, this really is a tribute to how movies are made and movie making altogether. I'm not going to give away specific context, but wow, I'm really pleasantly surprised and pleased to say that I really enjoyed Minions and Monsters. Those that watch this movie, of course, children, young children that this movie is meant to be played in front of, are going to watch this. They're going to have a laugh or two. I was consistently laughing with a bunch of references and even certain moments that surprised me too. Someone straight up gets decapitated in this movie, and I'm like, whoa! And of course, the whole dick reference. But the children that are going to watch this movie are for sure going to be into it just because it's the Minions, of course. But there is hope for my end, and that's why I'm also praising this movie, I should say, that this movie will inspire those to go into old Hollywood and research and watch old stuff like Charlie Chaplin and whatever, because if this movie gets people to go ahead and rediscover old cinema, that makes it a win altogether. On top of it, this being a win for this being such a very good movie anyway. I know movies about making movies or Hollywood or older generations of Hollywood don't necessarily have that much appeal, but with the Minions, I think this is a great gateway to do that. I know from 2022, I was one of the ones that loved Babylon by Damien Chazelle. I know this is a divisive movie among many for being indulgent and just being so over the top, but again, I loved it. It was one of my favorite movies of that year. But if I were to say that there's a movie out there that I would like kids to watch and discover old movies for the first time, it would be Martin Scorsese's Hugo, one of my personal top 10 favorite movies of all time. And speaking of Trip to the Moon, you can see in the back of this Blu-ray here, the top rear part, there is a reference to that movie that is featured prominently here as well. So I would love for kids to watch this as their first discovery for cinema. But Minions and Monsters is for sure not a bad way either. On top of it being easily the best in the series, the best in the whole Despicable Me Minions franchise since that first entry, from my estimation, from what I remember. Again, there's a caveat here in that I have not seen 2 of these movies in this now 7-movie franchise. I mean, this movie series has been going for over a decade and a half, and we have 7 Minions and Despicable Me films altogether. But in any sense, I'm just rambling on here. I'm just very, very elated that this movie is very good. And Toy Story 5 has some competition in the cinemas this summer so far. I mean, I already saw and reviewed that a couple weeks ago, but with this, I think I enjoyed it just about as much as that one for different reasons, but also this being one of the stronger entries in the series and just something that I think anyone who watches it will be into. If you're not so into the Minions in the first place, I actually think this might win you over and you won't be so disgruntled watching it altogether. You may not necessarily go ahead and want to watch more of these movies in general, but I will say that it is one of the more pleasant watches for anyone watching. And of course, it got me to be won over because of the whole film history angle here too. And yeah, for sure they got me. And for that, I definitely recommend Minions and Monsters. With all of that being said, my final verdict for Minions and Monsters is 4 out of 5 stars. Thank you all, as always, for watching. Be sure to like this video, comment on what you thought of Minions and Monsters. Social media links in the description. Subscribe to my channel for more, and I'll catch you on the next movie review.